Hello, Rob Lambert here with Asset Protection Training. Today I'm doing a second video on putting your perfect plan together. Don't watch this if you haven't watched the first video. And I'm going to review some of the issues in the first video briefly before I get started. But the majority of today will be focused in on what is an offshore LLC and what are the advantages of using a Belizean LLC. And you're going to find out it's mighty powerful. Okay, let's dig in. This is a diagram that most of you are familiar with. I used it in my first video and you've all watched it. But I'm going to briefly use it again to overview the structure that I think is just right. The structure that I think does the job for you. The structure that should keep you out of trouble, period. Come hell or high water. That's pretty much the way this works. Anyway, there's 4 parts to it. And the first part, which we focused in on the last video, is this asset protection trust right here. This is an entity that is run by the trust company, settled or established by the settlor. It has a protector. Normally the protector, there's videos on that, but normally the protector is often my client when there's no problems. And when there's problems, the protector should normally be an offshore person with a fiduciary obligation to the trust and the settlor. And normally should be a lawyer and normally should be familiar with international litigation. But unless you're in trouble, you don't need to spend all that money and you can usually do it yourself. And the beneficiaries are the groups of people that you sincerely want to be benefited by the assets you've protected from creditors. We went over this in pretty significant detail last week when we did the first video. Well, today we're taking part 2, which is this offshore LLC, the little triangle. We're going to focus on that all day. So I'm not going to talk too much more about it except that why do we even do it? What's the purpose of an offshore LLC? Well, I can tell you, you really can get by without it if you could open up the bank account in the name of the Asset Protection Trust, and if you trusted your trust company. Well, first of all, I never trust trust companies. I always assume they're crooked. The ones I'm referring to you are far from crooked. They're fabulously well established and well known for their integrity, decency, financial and moral integrity. But that's just the trust company. It doesn't mean they won't get greedy and they won't steal from you. So never put yourself in a position of having to trust the trust company. Well, how do you avoid having to trust the trust company? That's one of my most important rules. Don't trust anybody. Well, how do you avoid trusting the trust company? That's very simple. You establish this offshore LLC. It removes control from the trust company Asset Protection Trust up here. There's no control up here because there's control, but there's no assets. The control's irrelevant. The control that matters is down here in the LLC where the money is, where the businesses are. You could have 15 donut shops and 2 dive shops and an investment banking company all owned by this trust or under this offshore LLC. But the good part, if they're under the offshore LLC, who runs it? The manager. Who is the manager? Well, funny thing, you're the settlor, you're the little red guy, and you're also the manager. This red guy is you. Also, this is you over here as the general partner of the family limited partnership if you decide to protect domestic situs assets. That's for the next video. We're not going to talk about that today. That's part 4. Part 3 is opening a bank account. We're going to talk about that next week also. So right now we're just focusing in on the offshore LLC and its purpose. Its purpose is simply to keep you in control. And remember, this is all modular. We don't have to do this whole thing. You can live with just this. This is part 1. This is just the Asset Protection Trust. It's mighty effective. It will protect you. The problem is, like I said, the trust company runs it. And unless you trust your trust company, I would never do this. And since you never are forced to trust the trust company, don't. Don't ever. The only reason you would ever use this structure is if here, under the Asset Protection Trust, you had another entity like a donut shop owned by an LLC or a corporation, or you owned a dive shop or an investment banking business or anything. Anything that's an entity that you control is safe to put under this type of trust because the trust company has limited ability to manipulate those entities down there. Almost every client feels comfortable if they're the manager of the LLC and the LLC owns all the assets. They feel comfortable that they're not vulnerable to theft. And one of the things that you should note, you don't even have to tell the trust company where the assets in the LLC are. And let's look at that. There's the LLC. Assets in the LLC. I have no exposure to this trust company. And I go to the ridiculous extreme of not even talking about the assets down there to the trustee. I have several asset protection trusts, and I'm familiar with many trust companies. I've come to the situation where after decades of working with people, I do trust them. I'm willing to go with this type of structure, even without the LLC in some of the cases because of years and years and years of relationships. But candidly, it's very seldom I have to do that, and there's no reason you should. So this structure right here is the minimum safe way to begin to open a bank account. This is the minimum structure you need to make sure that you remain in control of the bank account. And here we are. Part 3, that's adding a bank account. Adding a bank account will be relatively easy once you form the LLC. It's going to be next to impossible if you do it without the LLC because the banks don't want you. They don't want somebody who is a U.S. citizen. They simply are sick and tired of the bull that the U.S. government puts people through. The serious scrutiny and expensive compliance just makes the banks not want to do business with U.S. citizens. Well, somehow most banks have come to the conclusion that if you use an offshore LLC, it somehow removes the taint of doing business directly with a U.S. citizen. I think it's a fabrication. It's a ruse, but it makes them feel happy and they're willing to open a bank accounts, and who cares? And the only other thing we might do is if we want to include our domestic situs assets, our U.S. situs assets, the things over here on the dangerous side of this barrier between offshore where it's safe and onshore where it's dangerous, we can definitely include our domestic situs assets. This is your decision. It's up to you whether you want to do it. Right now, it's not part of this video. That'll be next week. Okay, guys, that's the structure. And just so you know where we are today, we're right here. We're not opening a bank account. We're not worrying about the Asset Protection Trust. We're just worrying about what this baby is, a little bit about how it works, and what are the nuances? Why do I like it so much? I'll get into it briefly, and by the time I'm done, I think you'll be both knowledgeable and proud to call yourself the owner of an offshore Belizean LLC. Well, what are the normal benefits of a Belize LLC? I'm just going to read these to you, and these are the key ones, but there's more. First of all, a Belizean LLC can have a single member. That is kind of a big deal. They used to always have to have two. But you can have one member, you can have disregarded entities, you can have it be treated as a corporation, you can have it be treated as a partnership. That's Form 8832. I'm going to be showing you that form before we're done tonight. And of course, as part of this process, if you do a plan, you'll be getting information on the tax compliance. You'll be getting copies of the tax forms or links to where you can download them. You're not going to be left out in the cold, but the compliance is very easy. You'll see it's a check the box. You tell the IRS how you want it treated, and they let you decide how you want it treated. It's a little different because it's offshore, but once you know the rules, it's a snap. It's a 5-minute job. Okay, members may manage the company, or you can designate other people. It is normal for an LLC to be member managed. That means that you, the member, run the LLC. If you get tired of that, or you wanted to put your investment advisor, or a lawyer, or a friend, or a son, or somebody else in to control your LLC, you would just designate them as a manager, and then you would have a manager-managed LLC. Now, the code in Belize is really very clear. Really clear. Neither members nor managers are personally liable for the obligations of an LLC. It's spelled out in plain English. It's not like you knew or you should have known, or you're the manager of the LLC, so therefore you're responsible personally for everything that happens. They've legislated that argument out of existence. There are no accounting or auditing requirements. You do have to keep books, but you don't have to show them to anybody. Of course, you wouldn't have a company without books, but there's no reports. You don't have to go spend money having some fancy, boring CPA spend a week or 2 or 3 at your office figuring out the nuances of your books and charging you thousands of dollars. Those simply don't exist. The LLC, a Belizean LLC, is not subject to any Belizean taxes. I'm going to show you that in the legislation. They go on for pages and pages and pages about how taxes in Belize are not going to impact any Belizean LLC. It's a pass-through, disregarded entity in the United States if you want it to be. You can also have it treated as a corporation, which means it's a double tax entity, and sometimes that's advantageous to you. You can have it treated as a partnership if you've got more than one member. In fact, you may have to treat it as a partnership. You will not be able to treat it as a disregarded entity because that's only for single-member LLCs. The Belizean authorities have taken huge steps to make the registration of LLCs and trusts highly confidential. They're completely private. They're protected. It's called a closed registry. That means they don't tell anybody anything. If you're the beneficiary of a trust and you can prove that, they'll talk to you. But anybody else walking in, they're going to get a dead stare and get thrown out. There are no paid-up capital requirements. Now, that doesn't seem like much of a big deal to most of you who are used to calling up somebody in the United States and forming a new entity for $200. But it's a great big deal in Central and South America and in Europe. It is really difficult in most countries to form an entity without paid-in capital. In places like Mexico and Costa Rica, and indeed Belize, when you don't do an LLC, they have capital requirements, they have audit requirements. Business entities in Europe and South and Central America are much bigger deals than they are in the United States. They're required to have what's called separate entity status. That means there's certain requirements of stature and net worth that almost every country imposes on almost every entity that is formed in that country. Well, all those requirements are waived. There are no requirements in Belize. Next, international trade is allowed anywhere outside of Belize, but you cannot set up an LLC and open a donut shop in Belize. You can open a donut shop anywhere else in the world, but LLCs are not for doing business in Belize. That's one of the only limitations. You can open accounts in virtually any currency. That's really an issue with the bank. You can have precious metals accounts. You can open insurance, form insurance companies, buy insurance. You can do anything you want in an LLC that you would do as a human being. And it's interesting how easy it is to basically replace yourself with a few pounds of paper and an entity formed in another country, and that new baby, that new person, that new legal entity called an LLC steps into your stead, but it owes nobody any money. So, or if you've done it right, it's not responsible for any of your debts, and lo and behold, it's a great asset protection vehicle. By the time I'm done tonight, I hope you agree with me. You'll see it. And what's kind of neat, you can set up credit cards, debit cards, merchant accounts. I just set up a merchant account abroad. Yeah, it's 4% instead of 1.5%, and I'll probably get it down to 3%. So it's more expensive, but you know what? It's safer. And you have to decide. Sometimes safety is better than making a few extra bucks? Well, those are the key generic benefits of a Belizean LLC. I'm going to start to get a little bit more particular now. I want to go to the website, the official announcement and explanation from the government of Belize. I want to show you the website where the Financial Services Commission basically communicates with their population, and I'd like to walk you through the important documents. I'll show you where you can download them, and they're also downloadable on our site. I want to talk a little bit about the International Financial Services Commission. This is their homepage, and there are a few things that are worth noticing here. First, I think that they're really going out of their way to make sure everybody knows that Belize is taking your privacy and your confidentiality needs very serious. I want you to let me read this to you. The law provides that all offshore trusts governed by Belize law must have a trust agent resident in Belize. Only a limited information, now look, this is the key part, only a limited information needs to be provided to the trust registry. The name of the trust, the date of settlement, name of the trustee, and name of the agent. Note, it didn't say who settled this, who's the client, who do we tell the creditors to go after. All other information is kept by the trust agent. That's your lawyer. That's covered by both all sorts of privacy and confidentiality requirements of the statutes, but it's also covered by an attorney-client privilege. It's pretty good. No confidential, I'm reading it to you right now, right here where the pointer is. No confidential or private information needs to be disclosed to the registry, and it is not necessary that a copy of the trust deed be filed. So whatever you say is safe, and it is not available. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful situation that they just keep pounding on this. Now, see, Mr. Gandhi, if you got in a jam and you needed to speak with him, you can actually get on the phone, speak with Mr. Gandhi. Now, don't you dare call him saying Rob Lambert said to call you. He's a director of the International Financial Services Commission. He's considered one of the founders of the offshore industry in Belize. He's about 80 years old, and he's really a wonderful, nice man. But he's really held in high esteem in Belize, and he's always willing to help, and he's always available, which freaks me out, but it's true. Now, this is the building where he works. He's on the second floor on this side. See where I'm going back and forth with my pointer? He has this whole second floor. This is where the trust registry is. Up here, this is the third floor. All this whole side is where the Prime Minister's office is. This is basically the government building of Belize, not the central bank, but this is where the main government functions take place. It's in a city called Belmopan, and that's it. Belize has 300,000 people. Most of you come from cities with more people in it than that. It's not a large country. It's a proud country, and they have great laws. And it's an English-speaking country with a highly educated population. So I'm a big, big supporter of Belize. Here is an overview of the International Limited Liability Companies Act. This was just put out by the government. I think it's pretty neat. It shows how serious they're taking this. They actually put a study group together and took the best things from Nevis and the best things from the Cooks and the best things from Wyoming and the best things from Delaware, and they came out with a strong, very flexible set of laws. They put a lot of work into it, and their goal is to shock the international world and dominate the sale of limited liability companies. They want to take the business away from Nevis, and they've done some things to make their laws even stronger and harder to get to an LLC. I'm going to talk about some of them briefly. Number 3, an LLC has distinct advantages over both a corporation and a partnership in that it not only avoids multiple level taxation, it limits the liability of its members to the extent of the contributions made by them to the company. This is number 3. Look at that. They limited, and this is in the statute, they limit the exposure that the members have, the liability of its members is limited to the extent of the contribution by the member to the company. So, if a member makes a $1,000 contribution and that's all they've ever given, that's all they're ever responsible for, even if the company becomes the next Apple computer. Next, no member of an LLC has personal liability for the debts of the LLC unless there's a personal guarantee or some separate paper. This is fabulous. I'm going to go to number 6. Here they're actually saying, we copied the best parts of the Nevis and the Cook Acts. Here are the features of it. Paragraph 7. It gives you freedom to do it any way you want. It is so flexible that all you really need to do is say, we're an LLC, and here's your $100 fee. That's their one-time filing fee with Mr. Gandhi's office, basically telling them every year that the company's in existence and who the agent is. It's a simple process. It never exposes you, the client, the person in need of protection, to exposure. Unless you want your name out there, it's not going to be out there. Number 8, an LLC shall be a legal entity with separate rights and liabilities distinct from its members. Well, we all knew that, but look, here's what they're saying. No manager, officer, member, or employee shall be liable for the debts of the LLC unless you formally assume them. That's paragraph 8. Paragraph 9. It's very clear that the creditor's rights are limited to the worst case of a charging order. That is the sole remedy. The statute says it's the sole remedy. Well, most of you know what a charging order is, but those of you who don't, just let me tell you very briefly. A charging order says that all the creditor can get is whatever the member has distributed to him from the LLC. If the LLC makes no distributions, the creditor gets paid nothing. And who's in charge of what's distributed? Well, normally the person in charge of what's being distributed from an LLC is the manager of the LLC, who's usually the debtor and usually the person in need of asset protection. So we have very strong laws that clearly, they take all the guesswork out of it. The sole remedy is charging order. Period. End of report. No negotiating or debating about that. Number 11. An assignee of a member's interest shall in no event have any right to interfere into the management of the company. See, this makes it clear and drives a nail in the coffin that all a creditor can get is a charging order. They can't go foreclose on the interest and try to take control of the LLC and force liquidation of its assets. The creditors are kept on the outside with no power over the entity. That's pretty nice. And you've also got on top of this the protection from the Asset Protection Trust, which basically means that the assets in the LLC are not on your balance sheet, and applying the first rule of asset protection, which is what you don't own can't be taken from you. It's extra safe. This is extra safe. And again, why are we doing the LLC? Not because the trust standing alone won't do the job just fine. We're doing the LLC because we don't want to be vulnerable ever to anybody else, and it eliminates our need to trust the trust company. So by forming the LLC, we are insulating ourselves dramatically from those risks. And I'm just proud that Belize did this. I'm shocked by how solid this is. Now, one of the limitations, paragraph 13, the act is confined to international LLCs. Only non-residents would be able to form these. There's also restrictions on doing business in Belize. Well, most of you aren't really going to want to set up an office in Belize. You're going to want to invest money and open bank accounts, and you're free to do that, but you couldn't open a donut shop using an LLC. You could open up a a big bank account if you wanted, but you cannot own a business there. This is really important about 14, and you should see the statute. You're going to have a copy of it. The Act exempts LLCs from taxes, duties, and exchange control. It's very clear. There is no tax on LLCs. It's extremely confidential. Paragraph 15. The Act contains the usual confidentiality provisions. All proceedings other than criminal are held in camera. That means that it's a hearing in a judge's chambers, no court reporters, and usually in the case of the LLCs, even by statute, there will be no discussing. There is no dissemination of the details, which could either be embarrassing or problematic to you sometimes. It's highly confidential. Paragraph 17. There is no requirement in the Act for an LLC to prepare annual accounts or to appoint an auditor. However, a simple annual return in the form to be specified by regulations would be lodged with the registrar, setting out the name of the LLC and the address of the registered agent. That's paragraph 17. That's the only annual requirement, period. Nothing else, nada. No worries. This is an easy, safe entity to have. Paragraph 18. The conclusion is important just for the first sentence. The Act provides a comprehensive but not cumbersome framework. That's the important part. They did their best to keep it powerful and non-cumbersome. Now I'm going to show you the key provisions that I think are the most important. The Act is about 60 pages long. I'm just going to focus in on a few paragraphs very briefly, give you an idea as to some of those key provisions. In addition to the overview I just showed you, the government just published regulations dealing with the LLC Act. These were just sent to me, as I mentioned last week. Right here, they were signed by Dean Barrow, the Prime Minister, on the 16th day of April. So these aren't even a month old, from my perspective. And the regulations are really, really valuable. I don't think it's that important to show you all the details, other than I do want to show you that they actually included a sample LLC agreement. Really pretty aggressive. They're really encouraging their practitioners to adopt this. I think this is going to become very, very, very significant instrument in the international financial world. You should print out a copy of the regulations, look at them. The agreement that you're going to get for your LLC is much better than this. And in fact, it's been reviewed by several of the main law firms, and it looks like some of the best firms are all going to adopt it. So you're getting the best of the best, but the regulations are kind of important. Now, here's the Act. See, Belize International Limited Liability Companies Act. I'm going to briefly go through the provisions just for a minute or two, then I'm going to go to paragraph 37, where the rubber meets the road in my mind. Well, you can see, if you're familiar with Nevis or you're familiar with Delaware, you'll see a lot of very, very, very similar provisions here. Paragraph 15, the restriction on business in Belize. Duration. The thing goes on forever. That's paragraph 16. They don't die at any particular time unless you decide you want to have it limited in duration. That's pretty interesting because most places you can't do that. And that can be valuable sometimes. I'm going to go to paragraph 37. Part 4 is where the rubber meets the road. I believe that's page 70 or 270. Yeah, here we go. Let's go to paragraph 270. Here we are at page 270. And here we are at the key provision that I think is just fabulous. 37.7. Look at this. This is the most important provision in the Act. Every creditor shall, before bringing an action or proceeding against an any limited liability company property governed by this act shall first deposit with the Supreme Court Registry. That's a real building and real people right downtown by the Swing Bridge. Shall deposit with the Supreme Court Registry an amount equal to half of the amount claimed, or $50,000, whichever is greater, for securing the payment of all costs as may become payable by the creditor. Well, my goodness, what have we got here? This is amazing. If somebody wants to go after your LLC, they're going to have to post a bond. Not a bond. This is amazing. If somebody wants to go after your LLC, they're going to have to pay cash dollars, $100 bills, or a certified check, real money, real funds, into the bank account of the Supreme Court, and keep that money in that bank account for the pendency of the litigation. The hearing will be in camera. It will not necessarily be fair. It will definitely be favoring the debtor, because the debtor has availed himself of laws that are very clearly designed to discourage creditor litigation, creditors from litigating in Belize. They make it so expensive. Well, this is without par. This is without any other country. No other country does anything like this. This is without precedent. That's the word. This is without precedent to require a creditor to have to post half of what they're after in cash. Believe me, it's a fabulous disincentive. I finally have reached a stage where I almost would say in public that a LLC in Belize alone is a worthwhile asset protection vehicle standing alone. I don't really believe that, because the litigation won't always be in Belize. You can't migrate it and keep the same laws. It's not a standalone asset protection entity, but it's darn close to being good enough. And it's a very big disincentive. I sure wouldn't want to have to post fees equal to half of what I'm after as the entry permit to even file a lawsuit against somebody I'm after in Belize. This is a mighty potent remedy. Paragraph 37 is where the rubber meets the road, and you'll see if you read Part 4, it's got all the things that I've already mentioned to you, and it makes you feel good. And read paragraph 33.1. The limited liability company shall be solely liable for its debts, obligations, and liabilities. Now, here's the most important provision in paragraph 33, number 2. Notwithstanding any other law, right here, unless liability for limited liability company debts, obligations, or liabilities has been assumed by the person against whom liability is asserted, no manager, no officer, no member, employee, or agent of a limited liability company shall be liable for the limited liability company's debts. They go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever about how the limited liability company's debts are not the responsibility of any of the employees or managers or members of the limited liability company. 94, paragraph 1. Subject to this act, a limited liability company shall not be subject to any income tax, business tax, withholding tax, on and on and on and on. It's not going to have to pay taxes in Belize. It's exempted. So what you have is an entity that pays no taxes, can open bank accounts, lets you stay in control of the entity and therefore control of your bank accounts, and cannot even be sued unless somebody puts up big bucks in cash, a sum equal to half of the total claim. And they opt for an in-camera hearing. And they're required to pay your legal fees if they win. And another very important thing, it's unethical to do contingent fee litigation in Belize. So another surprise. Lo and behold, the guy coming after you is going to have to hire and pay a lawyer in cash for the hours they work. They're not going to give them 50% of what they recover as some contingent fee situation. Nope, they're going to have to pay cold, hard dollars for representation. And they're going to be highly likely to want to settle with you because they're highly likely to lose. And the laws are just clear as can be. Okay, let's talk a little bit about taxes. I've made it clear. I mean, it's absolutely obvious that there is no Belizean tax. What about the U.S.? Well, most LLCs are pass-through entities or disregarded. And in the case of a U.S. citizen, a single U.S. citizen who forms an LLC, it is almost always a disregarded entity. That's the default for U.S. citizens. Well, let's look at the form that needs to be filed to make the entity classification election. It's a little bit different with foreign companies. This is the old check the box type form. It's an entity election information. You've heard check the box. This is form 8832. And look, part 6. This is really helpful because they simplified something that there's pages and hundreds of pages of regulations on this. But here it is simple. Look at D, E, and F. Because we're not concerned about domestic entities. These are the entities these are the elections that an entity can make when it's foreign. First, D, they can choose to be a foreign eligible entity electing to be classified as an association taxable as a corporation. You can elect to be an association taxable as a corporation. That means you're going to have paid double taxes. It'll be treated as a C corporation. It'll be treated in some cases as a controlled foreign corporation. That can be a good or a bad thing, subpart F. It's not really relevant to you because, well, unless you want it to be a corporation, but you can elect to have it treated as a corporation. A foreign eligible entity electing to be classified as a partnership. If you've got 2 or more members and each one has limited liability like they do under the laws in Belize, the foreign eligible entity can elect to be treated as a partnership. That means that you can allocate income between partners, you can allocate expenses, you can do all the complex tax and business things that you sometimes want to do with a partnership, and it is a pass-through entity, not a tax-paying entity. As long as there's 2 or more people, it will have to file equivalent of a partnership tax return. It can be number F, a foreign eligible entity with a single owner electing to be disregarded as a separate entity. Normally in America, I said when you have a single owner of an LLC, the default is to be a disregarded entity. Well, in the case of offshore LLCs, the default is to be a subchapter C corporation. If you don't file this Form 8832 in a timely fashion, and of course you'll be getting plenty of notice, you'll get the form, you'll get the instructions. This is a no-brainer type of cursory compliance issue, but you don't want to be sloppy about it. So you will normally want your LLC, if you're a single person, one human being, your trust has one set law, for instance, you would treat this entity as you'd want it treated as a disregarded entity. That's what you would want. But if you don't file this on time, you're going to have it treated as a corporation, which could be a problem for you. So we're just going to be careful about that. Well, guys, that's about it for LLCs. It's, as you can see, not that big of a deal. Yeah, I can't make it any more complicated. It's a simple little bucket that's, if you do it right, and you will do it right, is a pass-through entity. It holds assets. It lets you open bank accounts in other places, not in your own name. It lets you have a lot more confidentiality than if you did something in your own name. And it has incredible prohibitions and roadblocks to an aggressive creditor trying to tear you up. I think that it's a great entity. This is step 2. Next video, we're going to do step 3, which is opening a bank account, and also the steps you would take to do a domestic family limited partnership.